Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles.
I have an introduction to the whole methodology here, but I'm not going to do it until after we have this first study session, because we're going to, basically what I'm saying is we're going to jump right into the 9-foot water and swim a little. And then we're going to explain how to deal with jumping into the 9-foot water. All right. So I want you to get a Bible or a Chumash, please. If you don't have one, I think that was in the instructions.
Yeah, forgot.
Program. Yes. Okay.
Where are we going to?
Go get one. I'll give you 30 seconds because we're going to start reading Genesis chapter 1.
Okay.
Okay. We're going to start at the beginning.
That's
what
a good
I
thing.
would like you to do is keep in mind 5 things. You can scribble them down if you have pencil and paper, because you're going to read through the chapters first. I'll tell you what exactly to read, but I want you to pay attention to 5 things. Number 1, the names of God. Number 2, time. Number 3, verbs that deal with the creation of things. There are a number of verbs. You'll see them, in whether you're reading the Hebrew or the English. Heaven versus earth, statements that deal with those two geographies, shall we say. And what is the first creature? That means the first thing created. What is the first thing that is created?
When you talk time, you're not talking how many thousands of years ago.
No. I'm talking time
between things
within the context of the material you're going to read. All
okay,
right.
like how long from day 1 to day 2, sort of.
Whatever. No. It's not that. You'll see what I mean. Whenever time is mentioned. Okay.
Rabbi, will you define thing? Is thing anything, or is thing with sentience?
What word?
Thing. You said the first thing created.
The first item that was created.
So it doesn't have to be a living item.
Correct. Okay. All right. Now, I want you to read chapter 1 and the first 3.5 verses of chapter 2. Okay? All right. I want you to go to chapter 2, verse 4, because that one line split in 2, if you're using the JPS commentary or the Chumash, will help answer 3 of the 5 questions, believe it or not. Okay, so let's look at verse 4 of chapter 2. Ela toldot hashamayim v'haaretz behi baram. Okay, and let's take a step back. Verse 3. Look at verse 3, because there's another element that I forgot is not in verse 4. So let's start with verse 3. Vayvarach Elohim et yom hashvi'i vaykadesh oto ki lo shabbat mikol melachato asher bara Elohim la'asot. And God blessed the 7th day and declared it holy, because on it God ceased from all the work of creation that he had done. Eila toldot hashamayim v'haaretz behi baram. Such is the story of heaven and earth when they were created. Okay. Now, first of all, what is God's name?
This chapter.
What is God's name?
Elohim.
Elohim. Translated in the English, God.
In this still.
Right? Elohim. That's it. All right? Now, what is the word? Now, here you're going to have to look at the Hebrew if you can. Otherwise, I'll explain. What is the verb that is used in both in verse 3 and the first part of 4 for the act of making things? What's the verb?
Bara.
Bara. Beit Resh Aleph means to create. Okay? Now, by the way, you should know, and keep this in mind when we look at chapter 2, that verb throughout the entire Bible is mentioned about 55 or 56 times. It is only used for one creator,
Hashem.
God. Only used with God's creative activity. Only. Got that?
Rabbi,
Yes.
are there different God names in those 55 or 56, or are they all Elohim?
That's a good question. I can't answer it right now. I can check it for you, okay, but not now. Very good question. All right. Now, and the final thing is, what has been created? What does it say? What was created in the first part of verse 4?
The first part.
A genealogist noticed the use of the word toldos, which is interesting when it's applied to heavens, when it's applied to nature and not applied to things that have children.
Right, but that's not what I'm talking about.
Heaven and earth are created.
Heaven and earth.
Heavens, it says in my translation.
It does. It's heaven, shamayim va'aretz. That's the same way that this whole thing begins, right? Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. Right? We're going to go back to that beginning in a minute. But it's heaven and earth. Stop. All right? So, name of God is Elohim, key verb bara, and what is created is heaven and earth. Agreed? All right. Look at the second part of the verse. What's God's name?
Adonai.
No.
Adonai.
Adonai Elohim.
Huh?
I thought you were talking about verse 4.
Yes. The second part of verse 4, it says Adonai Elohim. Does it not?
Yeah.
You see it? Lord God, however it's translated. Yes? Okay. So that's God's name. There's a difference between Elohim and Adonai Elohim. Okay. Hold on, Tybal. I see your hand. All right. Number 2, what is the verb that is used to deal with the process of making or creation?
Asa.
Say.
Asa.
Asa, made, not bara. Okay. And number 3, what was created?
Earth and heaven.
Earth and heaven. Different order. And that's not accidental. And now we're going to see why. Okay, now go back to the beginning. So, now I want you to just skim it. Don't read it carefully, just skim it. You'll get the answer to this within a number of verses. In chapter 1, is there any other name for God than Elohim?
No.
No. In chapter 2, is there any, forgetting about the first few verses, starting with verse 4, second half, to the end of the chapter, is there any other name for God other than Adonai Elohim?
I don't think so.
Okay. So the answer is no. So clearly, there are 2 different names that were used here. The first one is Elohim only. The second one is a combination of Adonai Elohim. And I can tell you, Adonai Elohim, other than in this chapter and the third chapter, is only used one other time in the entire Bible. So Adonai Elohim is a very unique name for God. Elohim is used all over the place.
Adonai Elohim is used more than one time in the Bible.
Where else?
I don't know, but I've read it.
No. There's one other time.
Well, these are 2 very different stories, though.
Aha.
The order of things and where they're created and how man is created and
all right. You jumped ahead.
Okay.
You ruined the surprise.
Well, it's not,
oh, my God.
You asked us to read both of them. It's your fault.
I am home. What can I? Just for
He
that.
gets an F. He gets an F.
Okay. Tybal.
So when I started looking at verse 4, and just to say, I'm online because I can't hold a book, so I'm in the JPS 1917, but the Hebrew shouldn't be different. There's a small hey in the 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth word. There's a hey in a much smaller font, and I'm wondering why. It's base and then a tiny.
Yeah. I see. Right. Okay. Yeah, that is a version. It's not clear why. I'm not sure. It's strange. People guess.
But it's not an allusion to God embedded in the word somehow.
No. Well, that's possible, but then why would it be smaller? If it were an abbreviation of God's name, I would assume it would be bigger, as it could be, as we know in other places, like the Shema, for example, where the letters are enlarged. So why it's there, I don't know, and I don't think anybody knows for sure.
There's 7 or 8 places in the Torah in which a letter is either smaller or larger.
Right.
And from what I have heard, because I've studied this part, no one knows why this was done, but it's original.
Yeah. Well, maybe. Well, original we don't know. I mean, because a lot of these things were created, were manipulated, shall we say, by the people who were the later redactors and actual what's called the Masoretes were the ones in the Middle Ages who actually put in the vocalization and who made these subtle emendations that were meaningful to them, and they didn't explain why. So that's all guesswork. It's why are some words have dots on top of them, even in the Torah scroll. And here in the Torah scroll, you will find a miniature hey as well. So I can't answer the question. Okay. All right. Now, so it is suggested that, in fact, the Adonai Elohim, the addition of Elohim there, may have been a late addition in order to build a bridge back to chapter 1, because it was clear anybody reading this text, okay, and it could have been the Masoretes who put it in, we don't know, but anyone who is reading these two accounts cannot be disturbed over the great differences that are found in those two stories, right? I mean, they're really, as we go through our little checklist here, you'll see, right? I mean, and so therefore, there have been many efforts made to harmonize the two. The Midrash does that because that's often what Midrash does. The rabbis who wrote the Midrashim are very sensitive to the problems in the written texts of the Bible, because there are many hands at work in many places, and they were collated together at certain points in antiquity. And the people who collated them didn't tell us why they did it. We can guess. And we're going to be doing that in just a minute. But the point is, they wanted to harmonize what seemed to be contradictions. So one of the basic ones between these two, and since you've read the two now, you'll know what I'm talking about, is that in one you have very detailed account of how a human being was created, right? And you have actually two different accounts of how men and women were created, right? So one of the common interpretations that you'll find in Midrashic answers is, well, the second one gives you the details of how the first one was done. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a typical way that Midrash explains. The rabbis and the generations of scribes who preceded them were often faced with challenges from within the Israelite, or let's say Jewish community and beyond, about all these apparent contradictions. What kind of a work of God is it, if God speaks out of both sides of God's mouth? Those were the challenge they face, legitimately. I mean, you already have, remember, when was the Bible exposed to people beyond the Jewish people? When did that happen? Do you know?
No.
What was the vehicle that brought the Hebrew Bible into world civilization?
Probably the New Testament.
No, wouldn't it be
Gutenberg,
the printing.
No,
it was a Greek translation. The
Septuagint.
Right.
The Greek translation, the process of which was probably begun in the 3rd century BCE in Alexandria, Egypt. From that point on, the 5 books of Moses, and then later on, the entire Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek because there were many Jewish people who couldn't understand the Hebrew, and they spoke Greek. But of course, inadvertently, non-Jews picked up on it as well and did what they wished with it, right? And there are elements, for example, of the Hebrew Bible where the Septuagint, one of the best examples is where it's in Isaiah 7:14, which says, "A young woman shall give birth." The Septuagint translated the word young woman as virgin.
Oh.
And that opened the door for the virgin birth of Mary, which could be grounded in that interpretation. And the person who used the Greek, whoever translated that into Greek as virgin, probably in Alexandria, for some reason was influenced maybe by some, Greek concept of women, right? It didn't do it. Nobody did it in anticipation that a whole theology would be built around it. It was used because that's what he's probably talking about, because it's an amazing thing, But that's not what the Torah means. That's not what Isaiah meant.
Were the Christians working?
If you look at how those words are used in the Hebrew Bible, and you look at a concordance, look in a modern Hebrew lexicon, you will see it's not used as virgin. Alma. Alma is the term. It doesn't mean virgin. All right, I'm going to stop for 2 seconds. Bert?
I did question, were the Christians then working off the Septuagint? Because they accepted what they call the New Testament.
Yes.
They were dealing with the Bible in Greek.
They learned the Bible in Greek, sure.
Not in Hebrew.
I mean, you think about no. Look, the Jews, the Christians who lived in Eretz Yisrael knew the Hebrew, okay? But by that time, it's clear that the Greek translation was floating around.
No.
By the way, we don't know that those original Jewish Christians, we don't know that they read. Remember, they existed before Paul, right? Those Jewish Christians, the small group of people who believed that Jesus was the Messiah, were Jews. And that was all they thought. They didn't think about Son of God. They didn't think about all of these other theological nuances. It was Paul who brought a lot of this whole approach in, because he was a Greek-speaking Jew. He knew the Hebrew, but he knew Greek, and that was his language. And he preached his, what he taught was in Greek. So he's a bridge. And later on, that continues as more and more people in the non-Jewish world log on to these things. Okay? All right. Tybal, go ahead, quickly.
Just in terms of a date that we'd use for this class, clearly the Septuagint date, 3rd century BCE, is the end date for when Tanakh was codified. But what would you say was the beginning date? Presumably it wasn't codified by magic in one instant.
Oh, no. It depends. I said Bible. I said Torah at that time. The process of the canonization of the Hebrew Bible ran probably into the 1st century of the Common Era. It took longer, and that's why many of these books were not translated until later on. So I would say the translation of the what we call the Septuagint covered a number of centuries, but it began with the 5 books of Moses. Okay, it began there. All right. Anyhow, so, all right. So the first chapter, then, we talked about the word bara. The interesting thing here is it's not used at all in the second chapter. That verb does not appear. And one would assume that, given the uniqueness that word has, we have it demonstrated in the whole Bible, that is unique to God. If I were talking about the creation of the world, wouldn't I at least use that word a few times? I mean, the truth is it's used 6 times in the first chapter. Okay, but it's not used at all in the second chapter. And it's interesting where it's used in the first chapter. It's used in the creation, the first stage of the creation of the animals, and the creation of human beings, and then the Shabbat, what we read just here in chapter 2. Those are the 6 instances. And one very interesting thing is, in chapter 1, verse 27, it uses the word bara 3 times in one verse when talking about the creation of of male and female, of the 2 humans. 3 times, which means that the creation of human beings was a big deal. Okay, a real big deal.
Especially to human beings.
Yeah, I mean, look, I always say that we were the biggest thorn in the side of God that God ever created. And you read, by the way, chapter 3 of the Bible till the very end corroborates what I just said. We become God's headache, if you will. That's just a metaphor. All right. Okay. So we see then that the use of terms, if you look at the terms in chapter 2, you see made, formed, when it's talking about the human being, yatsar, right? That's a term that is used often in the Bible for human beings who create things. And you think about on the High Holiday, on Yom Kippur, right? That term is used in a poem, right? Kechomer biyad hayotzer, as clay in the hands of the potter, right? Yotzer. It's used for God. I mean, yes, it's used for God elsewhere. Isaiah in chapter 45, verse 7, the famous line, Yotzer or uborei choshech, right? Yotzer or, God forms light. Very interesting use of the term, okay? How do you form light? Fascinating, very creative. Okay, but anyway, so yes, it can be used for God, but it's also shared with human beings. Asa. I mean, asa is also found in chapter 1. It's a very generic term. By the way, I'm not going to spend a lot of time a little bit of time. In chapter 1, there is something that is totally missing, another form of creative activity that is totally missing in chapter 2. Well, no, it's a couple of times. I shouldn't say never. That's right. It's in chapter 2 a little bit. But guess what verb appears more than any other in the first creation story? Look at
speaking. Isn't it speaking?
Speaking. Is that Bible? Yes.
Yep.
Speaking 10 times. It's found in chapter 1. That's great. Because what is unique about speech?
Human beings.
Well, number one, it is a human activity. That's true. But on the other hand, what does it do?
Allows communication between people.
Speech.
It's creative. Speech creates.
But it allows the next generation to know what went before it in a more explicit way. I mean, animals pass things on to their children, but not
right. Well, that's the result. Correct. Yes.
It transforms the non-physical into the physical.
Good. All right. So you can see this, but the fact is, it's a very non-physical action, right? I mean, we know speech comes from the larynx, blah, blah, blah. You know how it happens in us, yes? But the fact of the matter is, when I make something, if I'm an artist, you can watch me paint, right? And you'll see the colors, and you'll see my hand, and you'll see the brush. When I speak, all you can see is my mouth moves. And if I do this, as far as you know, I may not be speaking at all. The speech may be coming from the person standing on my left, because you don't know that my mouth is moving, do you? Right? So it doesn't require a visual. It does not require a visual of a mouth, unless you're a little hard of hearing, like I am.
That's with the deaf person.
To watch the mouth. But anyway, okay? So, I mean, the point is, it's a great verb to use for the creativity of a God that is non-material, non-physical. Okay? And 10 times it's used. All right. So then the verbs of creation are different in the two. There's some similarities because they're generic terms, but there are specifics that are very, very different. Okay. Now, what does it say in that first half verse? No, the second half. Hold on, Tybal. What does it say in the second half? Let me rephrase the question. What's the first word of the second half of verse 4?
Yom.
Yom.
Mm-hmm.
In the day, okay, that God created earth and heaven. In other words, Yom there could mean a concept of day, meaning an undefined time frame, right? Or it could mean that it was all done in one day, one or the other. But that's radically different in chapter 1, when the creative process, including Shabbat, runs over a period of 7 days. And each day, different things are created, and you begin with heavenly things, and then you move to the earthly things. Whereas in chapter 2, there is no definition of time. What does chapter 2 tell us about the creation of the heavenly host, about heaven? What does chapter 2 teach us?
It just says they were finished, right? That's the first sentence.
Well, yeah, but what does it say about it? Does it talk about stars, sun?
No, not really.
Firmament, heaven? Remember Shemayim? Shemayim in chapter
they existed. It basically says they existed. That's all.
The second story is focused in detail only on earthly things. That's why earth is mentioned first. The first chapter is focused on both. Begins heavenly, right? And then moves down to earthly.
In fact, in the second chapter, we don't even know that there's a moon and a sun.
Exactly. We don't know anything. Okay, so it's a different perspective. It's a completely different perspective. All right. Now, what is the first specific thing that is created in chapter 1? In fact, let's look at that first line before you answer. Breshit bara Elohim. All right, Tybal, did you want to mention something?
I had a question, but you're in mid-flow, so
all right. Okay.
I'll hold it. I was going to say, isn't heaven the first thing?
No, it just says heaven and earth. Well, yes. Well, hold on. No, it's not. Look at chapter 1. Okay. So
I think it's light.
It's a general statement, the same way that chapter 2, verse 4b is a general statement. That's an introductory statement. God created heaven and earth. Okay, and chapter 1 and chapter 2 agree that God did the whole thing. So that's a general statement. In fact, that bet, it's very problematic. Bereshit. Rashi is confused over it, and he suggests that it should be really read Bareshit or Barishonah or something like that. Okay, and he was the one who suggested that it may not indeed refer to a specific, an order of creation there. Okay, but here's the interesting thing, and I don't want to go into technicalities of the form. It's grammar. I don't want to go into it right now. But the point I'm going to make is one grammatical point. B, right? A bet with the two vertical dots under it.
Wow.
Okay, shva it's called. B. That one of the uses of a b is it's called the shva or the bet of means, a means of doing something, of getting something done. So ani shtamashti pati. Okay, pati. Well, that would be ba. No, bifatishali. I used my hammer.
Yeah, Joel, hold on a second.
I used my hammer. Okay, and it would be b. It was a means, right, of doing something. So the bet there, berishonah, bereshit rather. Reshit is a noun that means beginning. It does. But I am suggesting that you should read it by means of a reshit. God created heaven and earth. What does that mean? By means of a beginning. Remember, what came before that?
Nothing.
We don't know.
There was nothing.
Well, it says there was water, and it says there was a deep.
Wait. No, that could have been the condition after that Rishonah, Reshit. In other words, I'm suggesting something like the Big Bang. Okay,
that's where the light comes in.
And that's the key thing. There was this undefined or incomprehensible act on God's part that began the process of the creation of heaven and earth. And the first specific item that was created was light. And that was on the first day. Okay? Because what you have after that, if you will, after that reshit was a mush. I know I'm speaking, big bang type stuff, right? It was an undefined, who knows what. You know that scientists do not know exactly what happened immediately after the Big Bang. They don't. There's this thing called Planck time, which is a tiny, tiny, tiny smidgen of time that took place before the emergence of forms of energy like light. Light was indeed one of the first, according to the scientists today, it's very interesting, one of the first things that came into being was light energy. Okay, that happened. It's a coincidence. I'm not going to say.
Well, in physics, it's very transmutable into other forms of energy and substance.
Right.
So it conforms.
Got bosons. Remember, Higgs boson was the big thing about that actually functioned as a transformer of energy into matter. And that was later, a few milliseconds down the road. Okay, but it's stuff. It's hard for us not being scientists of this kind to fully understand. Okay, but the point is that the light was the first thing according to Torah. It makes sense because if everything is tohu vavohu, if everything is chaotic, right? Okay, if everything is chaotic, then what do you got to do? You got to bring order, right? Okay, what do you need? And I think now that we're reflecting the author as a human being here, right? And so that human being is reflecting how we view things. You've got to be able to differentiate. And in fact, the whole process that takes place after light is formed is a differentiating, lahavdil, to separate. It's a process of organizing by setting apart discrete elements in their own setting. That's taking order out of chaos.
It's like electrolysis, using energy to separate things.
In a sense. Yeah. Okay? So light is the first thing that was created because you got to be able to see to differentiate, right? I always use the metaphor, a dark movie theater and somebody yells fire and nobody can turn the lights on. What happens? Because of the darkness, chaos.
Yeah.
You've read stories in a bar, the darkened bar, and a fire starts, and nobody knows where the exits aren't properly lit, so nobody knows how to get out. People start clamoring, and people get killed. They get trampled to death. Chaos. Darkness is chaos. Darkness is scary, right? We say Hashkivenu at night in the marriage service. Cause us to lie down in peace because it's dark outside. Okay, anyway. So the first thing that's created is light. And then the process of separating waters above from the waters below, the land and this, different creatures. You got the sea creatures, the earth, the air creatures, the land creatures, and ultimately the human being. It's a process. It's actually an evolutionary process in a sense. Very, very sophisticated is chapter 1. Chapter 2 is very mythological. Great contrast. And what's the first thing? The first discrete, defined object in chapter 2 that is created.
Humans.
Say heaven and earth. That's not what we're talking about.
Humans.
Humans. Exactly. Exactly. Because what? What
That's the most important thing.
What does it say in the creation of humans in chapter 2? Okay? It says, read verse, my glasses back up. All right, verse 5. What does it say? When no shrub of the field was yet on earth, and no grasses of the field had yet sprouted, because the Lord had not sent rain upon the earth, and there was no man to till the soil. Right? Oh, that's very interesting. There was no man to till the soil. Hold on. You mean God could not create pre-tilled earth? Mm-hmm. He couldn't create earth that was already ready? I mean, give me a break here. This is, as I say, this is very mythical. This is a God who seems somewhat limited. He needs the human being to partner with him. Now, that's an amazing statement, right? Puts the human being in a very, very different place. Human being, it's a great statement that we're supposed to be partnered with God, right? That's what it seems to say. So what does it say? So God caused a flow. Now look at this. Look at verse 6. A flow would well up from the ground. A flow would well up from the ground. How did that happen? Who caused that to happen? Does it say God caused a flow? Well, read it carefully. No. The Hebrew is that way. The Hebrew is here. Eid ya'aleh min haaretz v'hishka. But a flow came up from the land and watered the face of the earth. And because it was watered, then what could God do? Verse 7. Vayitzer Adonai Elohim et ha'adam afar min ha'adamah. Right? God formed the human being from the fine soil and blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and he became a living being. So God creates the human being. But it seems as if it implies, I think, that the ground had to be a little moist so God could take it and shape it, right? Think about clay, right? Clay is not, it's the powder you mix with water, right? And then it's moist, and that's how you can shape it. So that's how the human being was created. But the human is the first thing created. In chapter 1, when is the human being created?
Later, after
At the end.
At the end.
The trees and the land and everything.
Everything was before, right? We are the last thing.
Is sentence 7 the reason, the reason that we believe you don't cremate the body, that you let it go back to be the dust?
That's where it comes. Yeah, yes. Okay, Tybal, now.
So I never thought of this before, because when you asked us the question about what verbs were in creation, in my head is always the saying, because to me that's always so striking in chapter 1. But when you were just talking about differentiating whatever, I wondered whether the saying was the first part when God was doing the saying, but the giving the name to something was the second part of creating. That because it's with words, that until it has a name, it's not finished. And I wanted your take on that.
Well, but God creates, God names. I mean, he calls the
first, but there are two different verbs. I mean, two different verb statements. First is the speaking, and then was the naming.
Yeah, all right. So there's two different acts on his part.
God, about the book of Genesis.
Okay.
Right. In chapter 1, there are multiple things. Okay, yes.
And comparing the two different
God speaks,
creation
but then it
stories.
says, and God.
Okay.
Sometimes it said God spoke, and it happened. Right, with light, Vayomer Elohim Yehi Or, he spoke. But there are sometimes it says that God made, but it doesn't tell us how he made it. So yeah, there are multiple ways in which God is seen as acting in chapter 1. I never said there wasn't. There are. They're using, and it's, as I said before, the specifics of creating certain things are associated with the verb bara. Right, the animals, where it says God created the animals. He created the fish and it's used in that line where God creates the fish and the birds, because that's the first creation of living things that are not attached to the earth. The vegetation had been done early on. That's the beginning of the process of living creatures. It's birds and fish, then four-legged animals and crawling things, and then human beings. Okay? So that's when bara is used. Then bara is used, as I said, for the human beings, big emphasis. And then it's used at the culmination with Shabbat and a culminating line which parallels the beginning line, making a frame that Adonai Elohim created, bara. Okay, and that's a structural thing that is used to set off a significant piece of text, as we talked about last night in our Psalms class. Okay, all right. So that's that. All right, now.
And Joel, in 120, it says that the human gave names to all the cattle, birds of the sky, wild beasts.
In verse 20 of chapter 1?
Chapter 2.
Huh? Oh, yeah, humans in chapter 2. Yeah, God does that. I'm going to get to that.
Oh, I thought you said a few seconds ago, God named everything, but God didn't name
that's right. That is a sign of the superiority. In other words, the human being in chapter 2 is acting already in godlike ways by naming creatures as God did in chapter 1. And by the way, it ends up, unfortunately, members of the female gender, at the end, who is it that names Chava? Chava? Adam does, implying that he's in charge. He named, right? By the way, it's very interesting. When you read about the naming of the tribes, the women do a lot of naming, implying they're in charge.
Except Rachel got overruled, even though she was dying and she called him son of my sorrow. She got overruled.
Well, there was a double one on that one because apparently, Jacob does a naming also. Yeah. But my point is, though, that it's a sign of control. All right. And that's in the first chapter, sure. God does that because he's the supreme boss. In the second chapter, human beings are already more partnering. Now, there's an element of partnering at the end of chapter 1, which we'll get to in a minute. There's no question. But it's not as obvious. It's not as what can I say, defining as it is in chapter 2. And that's the whole issue, because throughout the Bible, God is dependent upon humans to do certain things. And when humans don't do it, God gets very angry. Right? The whole concept of a covenant, right? It's a covenant. It's an agreement between two parties. Yes? And I do, you do. Quid pro quo. Well, but if the quid is done and the pro is not, then that makes the quitter very angry. And that's, pardon my use of language here. Okay, Mark.
So there's a tension between partnership and domination. There's like a dynamic going on that's never really defined.
No, you're right. But I think the implication all along always is that there's a senior partner and a junior partner.
Is that between human beings too, or only God?
Oh, I mean, you can argue kings have power that other people don't have, right? That's biblical. All right, priests have power that other people. All right, but in terms of God, there's no question who's the senior partner. Somebody trying to talk? Bobby, I think you're trying to say something, but you keep falling out.
No.
Are you all right?
Yeah. Hold on. I'm driving.
Oh. All right. Okay. Now, let's get moving on. There's another very important thing here to consider about the God of chapter 1 and the God of chapter 2. How would you define, at the completion of chapter 1 of the first account, what is the status of God's work? Right?
Everything's done.
What is it that God says at the end of each phase of creation?
It was good.
Good. And what at the end, after human beings are created and God gives them some instructions, what does God say at the end of chapter 1?
It was very good.
Very good. Very good. Now, is there any glitch that takes place in the process of chapter 1? Or does it just open up, everything happens smoothly?
Everything seems to open up
pretty smooth, right? Pretty smooth. Yeah.
Actually, Rabbi, isn't it smooth and smoother? Because doesn't Tuesday get 2 very goods?
Well, I would say you're probably right, because if he uses bara to create human beings, that's using the smoothest, the most powerful, right? And then Shabbat is also bara, right?
Right. But that's why I always thought from people like to marry on Tuesday, because it has the 2 very goods.
Yeah, that's right. Of course, that's a tradition. Yeah. That's one of the areas where it was carried over. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Because Monday, it doesn't say Hayat Tov, right? It's only on Tuesday. And that's for both days. Yeah. All right. Anyhow, so it's a smooth thing. Now, here's a question some of you already should know the answer to, because you've heard me teach it before. In chapter 2, the second creation account, tell me, is it a smooth creation? Are there any glitches along the way?
Adam gets lonely.
That's a glitch, isn't it?
He's like, help me here. Everything else has a pair.
Wait, hold on. What does God say when he realizes that Adam was lonely? God says, Lo tov heyot ha'adam levado. It is not good that the human was created or is by himself. All right, so that begs the question. Who created the human as a solitary creature? Right? So as I say, he goofed, Marlies.
Well, I was just going to maybe reframe it as he adapts, God adapts.
Yes, oh, he does. Good.
And sees what else is needed.
Right. No, that's a good thing. He adapts and adjusts. It's a good role model for we humans who screw up often. Right? Okay, good. That's a positive thing to learn. But if I'm trying to create a theology here and some form of definition of God, right? I'm faced with this dilemma that God actually made a mistake. And he admits it. Lo tov. It's ironic. It's interesting that in the first chapter, what is the key word that is used after every day? Tov, right? And then tov ma'od. Great. You don't hear lo tov. There you have it. Right? So, yes, as Marley says, God has to adjust and adapt. Okay, so he seeks a way of solving the problem, right? And the great solution is?
He creates woman.
No. What does God create?
He
takes a piece of man.
Read it. What does God create after he realizes that he wants to make an ezer kenegdo? He wants to make a helpmate. And so whom does God create? Read the text.
He fashioned the side of the human into a woman.
No, you jumped too far. You skipped verses. Go back up.
Oh, he created a deep sleep?
You went too far.
Too far?
Are you on the earth wing?
When God says, lo tov, I'm going to create. So what does God create in order to deal with the dilemma that God created on his own?
He says he'll make a fitting counterpart for him.
And what is it? Read the next verse. He creates animals.
Oh, okay.
Look at it. He creates animals.
Okay, right.
Right? And he brings the animals to Adam, and they get to, somebody mentioned this before, I think Tybal did, he names them, right? So, and in the process, this is where God hoped he would find the solution, because by naming them, he had to examine them, right, deal with them very carefully, so Adam could give them a proper name. That's presumably what the process would have been. So he scrutinized all these animals that God created, okay? But then what does it say? Lo matzah ezer. He did not find a companion.
Right.
So that was error number 2. So in chapter 2, Adonai Elohim flubs it twice. Yes, as Marlise has told us, he adapts and adjusts, and he finally finds a solution. But compare that to God's activity in chapter 1. Does God have to come up with solutions in chapter 1? No. Bingo, bing, bada bing, bada boom. Everything's great. All right. So you can see there's a radical difference between these two stories, right? Radical. Language is different, right? Different words, different names, definition of God, order of creation, right? It's interesting. The final creature in chapter 2 is the woman. One could make the case, the pinnacle of creation was the woman, right?
Yeah.
Because later on, it says, after they eat from the tree, the woman will lust after the man, right? And he names her, meaning she's going to go, and say, come, I need you, blah, 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 whatever. God forbid you should get angry at her, I mean, it's so sexist, pardon me. But that's the way society was. And we're in charge, so it reflects that. Chapter 1, let's go back to there. I see your hand, Tybal, just a second. Chapter 1, they are both male and female are created together. And God says to both of them, be fruitful and multiply. So who is responsible in that statement to being fruitful and multiply? Who's in charge of the process? It's a partnership of equals between the man and the woman. And then it says, you rule. Who? The man should rule or the woman should rule? No, it's a plural. You, the two of you rule. Chapter 1 is very egalitarian, interestingly. Chapters 2 and 3 is very gender-oriented. Like Tybal. Okay, then Barbara. Tybal.
I was just on the difference. I mean, you had said before naming is implicitly authority and control, but the first name in 23 isn't really a name. It's just a generic for the kind of a being she is, which is woman. And I was just trying to compare the verbs, if it was the same naming verb when she was being called woman and then Eve, but I didn't.
It could be. I never thought about it. It's an interesting point. I think it may have to do with, that word which shows the creator of life. It's because ultimately a human life emerges from the body of the woman. And so it's a recognition of that powerful process that a woman does generate. And that's very significant. There's no question about it. But the fact he is the one who entitles, as the superior, he's the one who names that process or defines that process, and he's playing his role as boss. I mean, that's what that seems to indicate. All right. Barbara and then Mark.
In sentence in Baruch 17, God tells man, the human, the only human at that time, that he shouldn't eat the tree of knowledge, from the tree of knowledge.
Yes.
And yet it's woman who eventually eats from the tree of knowledge and bans us from the Garden of Eden. Woman was never told not to eat tree of knowledge.
Well, it's an interesting point. We don't know what happened because she gives it to Adam. Right after she eats it, she gives it to him, and he follows her. It's not explained. Again, I think it's very interesting here because she's the first. The woman is the first one not to follow orders.
Except she was never given the order.
Well, we don't. She was not, but hopefully, presumably, it doesn't say anything, right? Yeah. Then Adam was at fault for not telling her, but he should have. What he should have done when she offered him, she bit because the snake. She got snake bitten, so she bit the fruit, right? And here's the whole role of the Nachash. That's a whole other story. You want to talk about mythology here, a talking snake, right? I mean, give me a break. But snakes were very powerful symbols. Very powerful symbols. Think about what happened in the Sefer Bamidbar when the people rebel and God brings about a mass of poisonous snakes, right? And starts killing the people. And he tells Moses, take a snake, and tie it around, make a pole, make a snake or a snake shape of a snake, and they'll look at the snake and be healed. That is really magic. Right? Rashi has to explain that by saying, no. They couldn't have looked at that. There's no magic here. What it was, they looked up at God. It was a means of getting the people to look toward God for healing because the snake obviously couldn't do it. And then, of course, later on in the book of Kings, we find with King Hezekiah, who starts the process of getting rid of the idolatrous things that were in the temple in Jerusalem. We're talking around 700 BCE, right? What does he throw out? The Nehushtan, Nachash, the bronze serpent. It was in the temple in Jerusalem to the point where it must not have been in a closet somewhere because he threw it out. If it was in a closet, who cares? He threw it out. He was cleaning out idolatry. So it was seen at a certain point by the Proto-Deuteronomic Hezekiah that this is idolatry. It's all wrapped with the power of the snake. So snakes were scary, presumably powerful, smart.
Cunning.
That's what that's about. Yeah, but the woman is the one who, takes the bite. Adam sees she bit. Nothing happened to her. Oh, maybe God changed his mind. I don't know. We don't know what his thought process. Okay, now Mark, and then Tybal again. Go ahead.
So the first chapter was more of a spiritual creation. It was more like a manufacturer using code to create something in the physical world, but it came out with defects. So the second chapter was more of a material correction of the first chapter.
Yeah, but the first chapter implies that there's nothing going wrong.
Yeah, but subsequently they figured out that wasn't true, because in the material world, everything degrades and things go wrong constantly.
Right, of course, sure. But the point is, all that in the second chapter and in the third chapter really is because of the nature of the human being too. But again, you're dealing with a different concept of God. The first chapter, the first story comes from the priestly tradition.
So is that the J or the P or?
P. Second tradition is a J tradition with the use of God's name. Okay, that's why the Elohim seems to be an addition. I mean, the P tradition does use Elohim. No, not standardly. Usually, the Elohim is seen as an addition. The J tradition, according to contemporary Bible scholarship, is the one that's used by that particular school, which has a specific definition of God, which is a much more humanized, anthropomorphic God with qualities of God. We're going to look at the flood account, okay? And there you will see that when it talks about when Adonai is talking, or describing Adonai, he gets very angry.
So it's like a bridge from like a deist creation to
that's the job. Okay, let me jump ahead. That is probably one of the things that happened by putting these together. Okay, when the redactor, whoever that was, some sofer, Ezra, somebody like him who was an expert in the Torah and who had access by that time. We're talking Ezra lived in the middle of the 5th century BCE. By that time, all of these Torah traditions were available. Okay, whether it is he, somebody before him, we don't know. But clearly, these totally different traditions were stuck together. And that split in the verse, remember the versification took place as a result of Christian numbering. We did not divide the verses with numbers. We did not. When they began to write books, okay, whether it was by hand and later obviously by printing, they numbered things. Okay, the Masoretes did not do that. The Masoretes created the spaces in the Torah and in other books that define different segments. You know what I'm talking about. Look at the Torah scroll.
Yeah, there's blank parts.
There's spaces, right? And that ends a segment, one segment, another segment, and so forth. That the Masoretes did. Okay? But the enumeration, the numbering of sentences and chapters was done by the Christians. And so they wanted this to flow smoothly from one to the other because they faced the same midrashic questions that the rabbis did. Remember, they had to deal with pagans much more than the rabbis did. The rabbis had to deal with other sects within the Jewish community and some pagans. But the Christians had a big job to do, right? Because they had this massive ancient literature that they considered holy. And they were aware of all these contradictions and different traditions as well. Okay, but in the end, when the redactor did this, what we, I think, have to assume is basically what you're saying. They needed to put together each of these two stories is too limited, right? On the one hand, the first chapter does not deal with a very empathetic God, right? It's cut and dry. And this God moves off when he's finished. Because how does it end? What does God say to the human beings? You rule, okay? I'm out of here. Not totally. But in terms, God, the general, humans are the lieutenant. Who bears the brunt of day-to-day activity? The general or the lieutenant? The lieutenant, or let's say the staff sergeant. They're really in charge, right? The staff sergeants are the ones that run the army on a day-to-day basis. The generals make policy, strategize, the big issues. The sergeants are the guys who push the tuchuses of the soldiers. Okay? All right. So chapter 1 is the general. Okay? God is the general. Chapter 2, God is the staff sergeant, dealing with the nitty-gritty, reacting human to human, prone to sometimes misinterpretations and some, bumps in the road, but nonetheless in charge. And the fact is, which one is God? Which one is God?
Both.
Exactly. And by putting it together, what they're saying, what the redactor was trying to indicate to the person reading this, is that you cannot define God too narrowly. Because when you're talking about this God is the only divine force in the universe. There's no other. And we know that there are all kinds of phenomena in the universe that are confusing. And Isaiah 45:7 says it all. God is Yotzer Or, the former who forms light, Uborei Choshech, Borei creates darkness. Oseh Shalom, Yotzer, of course, Oseh Shalom, he is the maker of harmony. Yotzer, wait a minute, let me try it again. Yotzer Berkos Oseh Shalom, Uborei Ra, and he is the creator of Ra, Resh Ayin, which can mean evil, it can mean chaos. If shalom is harmony, then Ra is chaos. Okay? And that's the way the earth was at the very beginning, right? God created the chaos, chapter 1, and then put it together. Okay? But the point is, what it is saying is, any phenomenon in the universe, ultimately, the divine power is responsible. Yes, the irony of free will pops up. That's the Torah, right? God gives free will to humans, okay? But in the mentality of antiquity, and even today, people, create a way of rationalizing how that could be. But God is in total control, and yet humans, the rabbis have that in Pirkei Avot, okay? They say, Hakol Tzafui, all is foreseen by God, V'harashut Natuna. But the permission is given. Okay? So, but that's the point. God is the totality of power in the universe. And a lot of people, I happen to agree, the fact that Elohim is used in that first chapter specifically, because the priests ultimately also use Adonai. There's a certain point when Moses is about to begin his activity with Pharaoh, God says, I only knew, the patriarchs only knew me by El Shaddai, but I'll now show you Adonai. So he's saying, I'm going to reveal, this is the P tradition speaking here. Okay, that's why Elohim is used here in chapter 1, because it's not yet the Exodus time. Okay, that's something that modern Bible scholars have clearly clarified. Okay? All right, but Elohim is saying something else. Remember, I mentioned this last night. Elohim is a plural form of a noun, the Yud Mem. The singular is Eloah, Aleph Lamed He, God, a God. Elohim is gods, the plural. But when you're talking about Hashem, all the verbs, except with a few minor exceptions, which we're not interested in right now, but the verbs are all singular. So the one God contains all, incorporates all powers that you can associate with a multitude of gods. They're all there. Okay? And that's by putting these two chapters together, even though with all the contradictions, they're saying ultimately that's the reality. And are there going to be contradictions when we deal with this kind of a broad theology? Yeah, there are going to be issues that are going to be taxing on our pea brains. But that's the point. We only have pea brains. We can't understand the overall power of that we're talking about here. Okay? We can't. And I think it's interesting. You've heard me say this before. Maimonides, the great philosopher, and the Kabbalah and the Zohar agree, even though their whole approaches to God are radically different. They agree on one thing. We cannot understand at the highest level what God is about. We cannot. And basically, that's a statement that's being made. But the fact that they're both there, I mean, think about your experiences in life. You guys have all experienced things. Sometimes you want to believe God is that great power. You know, the classic we talked about last night. You're looking up at the stars on the night, you know, looking at the galaxy and the moon and the shooting stars and the planets and the stars, blah, blah, blah at night. And you say, oh, look at God. Oh, what God. Look at that powerful God. Well, that's God out there, right? And that's this immense universal power, right? But when you are facing a personal dilemma right here, right? We're going to read a psalm, Eli, Eli, lama zaftani. My God, why have you abandoned me? We're not talking about the God of the stars and the sun and the moon. We're talking about the God that's there for us. And we want God to be right here for me at this moment because I need that strength. Okay, and so the author of the psalm is pleading, you know. And that's the other side of God, that, yes, I came through this. I'm going to beat this because God's giving me strength to deal with this personal issue, whatever it might be. And that's the kind of God we seek in those situations. Genesis 1 and 2 introduce both of those. Remember, God of Genesis 2 is the God of Genesis 3, who was concerned about them being naked, so he provided them with clothing before he kicks them out of the garden. First he gives them fig leaves, but then he provides them with actual clothing because he knows when they get out of the garden, there's going to be cold weather and they got to be taken care of. So even as he punishes them, he's taking care of them. That's God. That's the God we need over there. But sometimes I want to believe that this God is so powerful that he can maintain things. Okay? And so by having both of these contradictory accounts, you can accomplish that. Okay, Tybal, I've been keeping you waiting, and then we got to stop. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, and Bert may want to cut this out of the recording. Bert does. So, as you've been talking, and I've been thinking about things, I've been wondering, because you say, here, God is making mistakes, and humans need to partner, and this, whatever. Could, in fact, the snake be a phallic symbol of the male human being breaking away and struggling with authority to claim partnership? And that's why there are snakes with Moshe and Pharaoh. There are snakes here because, you know, when you said pea brain, PEA, phallus also starts with a P, just a little joke that Bert can cut out. But it just seems to me, why a snake is so phallic.
Yeah, I understand. It's a good point. It could very well be. I don't know. I mean, I don't know enough about I haven't done deep research on the snake. Okay. I mean, it's worth looking up. Why don't you check it out? Seriously. Okay. If you have some time.
I will. That's my homework. Got it.
Yeah. All right. And then give us a report next week. No, because it's very possible. We know throughout, I mean, the fertility is ancient Israelite women had these little cups they could put on their finger that were images of fertility goddesses. And they have large breasts. Some of them even they go down far enough that you can see the genitalia. Okay? And they were little things. And of course, there are little symbols of these things, idols that were, that they've had found as well. So the female, there's no question that the sexuality of the female is expressed in different concrete modes that have to do with daily life. And the snake is also part of that. Images of snakes appear all over the place. And yes, it could have phallic significance. Absolutely. And whether, and again, if that is indeed something that's behind the story of the snake in chapter 3, then the snake is a slippery guy who took advantage of the poor woman because he's the shrewd male. I mean, it could be. I don't know for sure, but it's a possibility. Again, reminding everybody that regardless of what we can read in our traditions, basically ancient and up until 100 years ago, some say even till today, a male-dominated society. That was the norm for millennia. Okay? And so, the snake could be an expression of that. Who knows? Okay, so next time we're going to look at the flood account. So please read those chapters beginning toward the end of chapter 5 through chapter 9 of Genesis. Again, you don't have to I'm not going to give you a test. So you don't have to, learn it by heart. But we're going to look at another approach to dealing with differing traditions. Okay, and again, but before we start looking, I'm going to do my introduction, which I did not want to do today because I wanted we jumped into the 9 feet and you're swimming. This is good. Now we can go back into the shallow end and see how they fill the pool. Okay, so that will be next week, same time, same station.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.